Hello and welcome to my new video. Today we have a sunny day in Copenhagen, snow, and I want to shoot some 120 film on my Hasselblad. My weapon of choice is HP5 Ilford black and white film, and today I want to try to make a good exposure in the sun and try my new development method. As you remember from the last time, I not really succeed with a good contrast and good density on my negatives. And because today I have a perfect light, I hope I will have a lot of sharpness and a good dynamic range. Unfortunately, I don't use Hasselblad so often, so sometimes I starting to have a problem with the shutter and the lock-up mirror. For example, I start to metering and start focus my frame, and I'm always struggling with the dark slide in the Hasselblad. I think it's a horrible design and you can make it so much better from the beginning. I bought this Hasselblad in a perfect condition and it looks basically new and I have zero problems from the beginning. It was actually never serviced and now I have a huge problem with the mirror, and I think the Hasselblad in general requires a lot of service and lubrication. For example, now I have a problem with the returning of the winding pin, and because of that I don't really have a perfect unlock after I make a frame. And because camera is a little bit complex to disassemble the main body and the main frame, you cannot really just remove the side of the camera, you need to disassemble it, remove it from the center, and in the same time to apply the new oil on the necessary parts. Sometimes it's just impossible to make it by your own. And now I'm actually thinking where I can find the guy who actually know what he's doing and can service this type of cameras. And in the modern days it's not so easy task. So if you know someone in Europe, please put it in the comments below. So, and after a relatively short walk I can go home and develop the film. And in the plan today also make a contact print and also make one bigger enlargement from this print. In previous videos you saw I bought the bottles, and today I want to make solutions and put them in the new good looking bottles. And now all of kits of my chemicals is actually reusable, but I need to still think a little bit about the storage. I think I already need a second type of box to store my Yoba bottles separately from the original chemical bottles, because it's not really enough space to store all them and basically toss them around. And because I'm using semi-dry darkroom, I don't really have access to the running water, so I try to be a little bit careful and make all the chemical preparation inside the same type of box. As I discussed in the previous videos, I put some percentage directly on top of the bottle, so rodinal is 4% solution, and I can easily recalculate it to the 100, 200, 500 milliliters and whatever milliliters you want of the final solution. Using syringes as a dosing system, it's quite nice because in principle they're more precise than these horrible plastic cylinders. In future plans I have better solutions for the storing chemicals and dosing chemicals, but for now I'm just using this system, and I only have problems where I need to make like 5 or 10 different solvents in the same time and fill it up and rewash it, so sometimes I just need to go back in the bathroom and wash up my bottles and the measurement cylinders. I still don't have access to the good water, even filtered one, so I probably will think about it, about the filtration or about distillation. I'm still not sure what is the best solution, what is the more cheaper one. But so far I see I have a lot of problems with the water and stains on top of the containers and around the containers, so it's just a good idea to use a filtered water. And in the same time, I think repetition of your chemistry and how chemistry works a little bit better if you don't really have changes inside the solutions with the unknown ions or chlorine inside the water. So the next step is a stop bath with a 5%, and it's exactly the same procedure, so I dose it with one syringe and just fill it up the cylinder to the final amount of water. So far, what is unknown for me is for how many roles I can use exactly the same solutions. So I have zero information on the manual or on the bottles. And I don't really like this approach because it's kind of unknown and you can lose some shots if you don't really know what you're doing and you don't really have a long experience in a darkroom with the black and white chemistry. But nevertheless, I already see a lot of improvements and I at least know what I'm doing and how to make it the solutions, and I can work with the black and white and the color in the same time without any problems and switch back and forward, and I just need to change temperature on my thermostat. To develop 120 film, I'm using only one portion of the cylinder and extend 35 reel to 120. And I'm keeping this red separator, so it means when I load the 120 film, I will have a film from outside of the drum. And because I'm using rotary methods, I can use 240 or I actually made 250 milliliters. And it saves a little bit of time and chemistry, and you don't really use the old chemistry in the next repeats. So let's start development. As a first step, I made a double pre-wash with a 20 degrees water to remove the halation layer from the film. First one usually remove kind of a huge amount of halation layer, and the second wash is just removing the rest of the material from the film. In this case, I have an absolutely fresh film and I can start development, and as you remember last time I just make a compensation for rotation in the Yobo from the recommendations in the internet, but now I just will stick with the manual and I run with the 6 minutes of development with the ISO 400, and I hope it will be sufficient enough for my purposes. Next step is a stop bath, and after stop bath you're moving directly to the fix. Overall it's quite easy process and temperature is quite stable and it's closed room temperature around 20 degrees. And I also investigate a little bit the problem with the sharpness and halation, stent development and different types of development, and so far yes, you can have a little bit different types of crystals in a black and white film. A little bit different rendering of the corners because how the crystals grow and direction how they grow. But also I think you can easily control it with the Yobo system. You just need some additional controller to the motor and how you make rotation left and right. So far this Yobo CPU processor doesn't really have this function, but I think it's quite easy to modify and make the programming with the knobs and make a rotation basically for the Yoba system itself. But I think the whole modifications of the system so far actually goes beyond the main functionality of the device, and it becomes just much easier to create a new one from scratch and make it from the good material and implement whatever you want in the system from the beginning. But I think because you don't really have a market to sell this type of products at the moment, and I mostly do it for my recreation, I think it's quite nice also to stick with the simplicity and just keep a little bit of the tradition and remove some bullshit from the old ages. So let's check result of my developments, and as you can see I have a great contrast and I really like how the base of the film looks like. It's almost completely transparent and I have a good contrast and really good blacks. So far everything looks good and I really like the result of the negative after drawing. So I'm also thinking about the structuring of my notes, and as you can see here last time this is my setting for the exposure, but as you can understand today I have a little bit more dense negatives and I think the exposure latitude will be completely different because I have a little bit different dynamic range from black to white. And the previous negatives was a little bit grayish in tone and a little bit too transparent to make a good enlargements. More dynamic range you have on a film, it means more modifications you can make in a darkroom, and in the same time you can actually mask and do a lot of stuff, especially with the black and white film. I also started to search the proof prints and proof printers, and unfortunately I don't really see on the market really good solution in nowadays. You can only see it from the Patterson, I think, and this is only one option, and it's not really cheap and not really universal, and I don't think it's quite easy and nice to use. I also think you have a lot of resolution loss if you don't really have a good contact between the paper and the film itself. And if you want to make several prints, I think it's also a little bit limiting if you want to put it back and forward on top of the paper. And especially in the darkness, you can basically drop your negatives or make some damage to them, so I don't really like this approach. And so far I stick with the extremely simple and stupid approach, just put everything on top of the paper and put just a glass from the frame on top of the negatives to push it back to the paper. But today I also want to try to make the same magnification and basically transfer exposure from the proof sheet to the final printing. Not sure if I will be successful with it, but at least I will try. So I will load the negative first and just try to find the proper magnification with the crop for this negative, and from there it should be a little bit bigger than the size of my paper to just expose the paper without the negative for the same magnification and same size and the same aperture on my lens. So far, grain looks amazing and I really like the sharpness on these pictures, and I think this is one of the best black and whites so what I make so far. As always, experience helps, and if you have more shots, more experience, more developments and more painting, you always getting better and better over the time. Quite simply, I will put the negative back from my sleeve on top of the paper, just align it on top and put the paper in my drum, and from there I will develop it. And my exposure guess for today, something like f16, 6 seconds, and from there make a steps around 2 or 4 seconds to make the proper range of exposure. If it will be not enough time, I will just increase time, and from there I make a second sprint and second test sprint. So let's exchange the bottles from the film development to paper development. Wait until it's stabilized to the temperature and start developing of the first proof sheet. I will use 1 minute of development and 1 minute of fix of the paper. And in between of them I have 15 seconds of the stop bath, and it's exactly the same solution but just different bottle of the stop bath what I used for the film development. Idea is quite simple. I have a cup inside the drum and I pour around 200 milliliters inside the cup. You can actually use less, but in my case I will never run out from the good solution if it's a little bit higher in amount, and especially if you have problems with your fixer. So the first attempt actually was not really successful, so now I put the glass on top to make everything more flat, and I will start with the exposure around 20 seconds, and from there I just redevelop the paper and check if I have a good results with my exposure on my proof sheet. So far I still thinking to find the solution to make a good proofs. I have two problems. First of all, it's the size of the paper. Unfortunately, I can print only 20 by 25 for the proofs, and my color paper especially have a limitation there. So, and I don't really like to put the negatives on the table and just toss them inside the dust. So in future, I just need to figure out something new. So the test print looks fine, and I see I have a really good shots there and contrast looks really good. And what is most importantly for me, my exposure I think looks really good in comparison to each frame, and I have a little bit of underexposure. So basically I have overexposed shots which I take in my apartment, but this is a little bit more mandatory because I want to pull up a little bit of shadows. So I will get a little bit more details in the blacks in this case, so I just need to expose it a little bit more in the paper. and I will probably get the perfect results as a final print. I also start marking my final test prints, and from there I will know which date I actually make this test print and which exposure I used. So I want to enlarge one of the negatives and just check which kind of results I can get and what is my sharpness and how well actually everything works with the new development. I actually really like the idea of the contact prints in my storage because you immediately can see what you have on the negatives, and it's a little bit different perception of the frame, and if you want to print it, don't want to print it, how it will look like with the same method of printing on paper. And I think it's just implement a little bit one like small punch inside your experience with a black and white photography or color photography in a darkroom. So let's load the negative, try to remove all the dust from top. But because negative is absolutely fresh and I try to wash out all the residue from the top and remove all the dust with my blower, I don't really have any dust on top. So let's check the focus and if I have a sharpness and how the grain looks like. Once again, I think I achieve quite good technical result, and this is more or less good start to make the art with the black and white. So far I'm using just the standard methods to understand how the film works, how the black and white color works, and I'm just using standard contrast paper, which I cannot really change, so it's more or less the same approach as with the color paper and the color printing. So I will start with the test prints with 6 seconds for each of them, and I will add by 4 seconds for each window, and I will make a small print with a 10 by 15 size. And procedure for the final print, it's quite the same procedure as for the contact sheet, so I will just make 1 minute development in exactly the same solution, around 15 seconds of stop, and around 1 minute of fix. Once again, I made 250 milliliters of solution, and unfortunately I have no idea how much I can pull up from this solution in terms of development of paper, how many papers I can make. So I think it's also a good idea to experiment a little bit and just make your experience and know how much you can make, how much you can pull up. And probably in the future I will make 500 milliliters and put them in these bottles and store them there, because now I have a actually place for storage all of these things. At the moment nothing is not really different from the color photography, and the black and white is more or less the same. I think it's probably a bit simpler, but in some terms it's a little bit more complicated. You have a little bit stupid nuances, how you make a solutions, which solutions you use. But in general, if you just care about the make straightforward picture without any additional, hassle around the how you make it, stand development, run development, and so on. And if you want to start with just make a consistent good shots, consistent good exposure, and consistent good prints, I think it's really good starting point to just stick with one developer and just try to perform and try to make at least a good result from the beginning, and from there you start modify your techniques. I think I make something like this with the color photography. I start with the traditional methods, never push, never overdevelop, never underdevelop. And now with some film stocks, I'm quite definitely more significantly in depth how I want to film be exposed, how I want to push it in a chemical way, what temperature works better, which actually solution works better. And with the color, I think mostly you have extremely dramatic results in terms of like horribly bad results. For example, if using bad chemistry. So my test prints show I need around 20 seconds, and I adjust my timer, and from there I start moving with my bigger prints, and I hope I will get it from the first shot, because it's already late and I don't want to spend the whole day in a dark room. But it's also quite nice because I can see all the results as a physical product in the same day where I shot the film. You can make a proof sheet, you can select negative what you want to print, you can enlarge it whatever size you want. And if you take a look on these prints, you can see I can actually make huge magnifications from these negatives, and I think the Hasselblad in principle, if you shot it with a proper aperture around 5.6 or f8 and the bright sun day, and in the same time it looks quite natural, quite normal, and all the prints what I make with the black and white, if I'm happy with my negatives, I think they kind of by default looks really good. So it's more or less first print what I put in my folder for storage, and I'm really happy with the result. So thank you for watching and see you in the next videos. Bye.